And our special guest tonight, John Lear. Much more to talk with John about. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. John, I have always heard, for better or worse, that our government cut a deal with extraterrestrials for knowledge, for technology, and gave them the abductions, primarily because they figured they couldn't stop them anyway, so they might as well get something out of it. Have you heard anything like that?
Yeah, they cut the deal, and they got the technology, but they had no idea that they didn't have any, that there was nothing they could do about it anyway. And they cut the deal saying, well, we'll only let you abduct this many. Well, of course, that the fact is, George, Earth is not so much of an experiment as a farm. They, whoever they are, if you want to call them aliens or whatever, they use this as a farm. They harvest, they manufacture souls. And we are just containers. This information comes from the yellow book that Bob read at the test site. And that's the deal. Now, whatever they have to do to keep us in line, if they have to go to the government and say, look, we want you to help us keep our secret, and what we're going to do is give you some technology, and, of course, we'll limit our abductions. But, that's just the story.
How many do you think they've taken from this planet, John?
Well, I used to say 1 in 10. I don't know whether it's any more or any less than that.
It's still a lot of people when you're talking about you're talking about 1 in 10 on this planet, right?
No, they're not taking them. Understand? They're just monitoring them.
They
take you.
Right.
They take you once when you're about 3, once when you're about 7, and once when you're about 11 or 12, and then usually that's it. Now, what they do, I don't know, but that's when they just take and monitor you.
What did you mean by soul harvesting? What are they doing?
It's my opinion that they manufacture the soul. The soul is a little electronic device that's installed in each human being as they're born, and it records all the emotion, all the senses, color, sight, sound, all that stuff, and it records all your life. And then when you pass away, when you die, that soul goes up to the moon. And there's a big, what we call the big soul machine on the moon. That's the picture that Hoagland has that came in lunar orbit 384M. I got a picture of it right in the middle of Sinus Medai. As you know, the moon is in a rotational lock. The same face points towards Earth at all times.
Right.
And right dead center is a plane called the Sinus Medai, meaning middle cavity. And right in the middle of that plane is a huge structure about 7 miles tall. It's a cube sitting on a tripod. Now the tripod appears to be about 3 or 4 miles tall, and then the cube itself is about 1 mile on the side. And I think that's where the soul goes after you die, and then whatever they do with it, whether they send it right back, whether they wait a couple of weeks, whether they wait a couple of months, it's sent back into a newborn baby and goes through a whole life cycle again. Now, each one of these souls records the entire human emotion of a lifetime. The problem is for us is we can't remember that. We can't take advantage of mistakes we've made. It just keeps recording on one soul. There might be 1,000 lifetimes. Now, if you go back in history, you'll find there are people that, for some reason, don't have their memory blocked, and they can remember back several hundred years ago. I remember this lady went back to England. She could remember her entire life there. She could tell the people that were there. They went to the gravestones, the whole thing. She remembered everything, and that happens occasionally to people. But in fact, the soul records, all the particular lifetimes that it's been through.
John, I know that Richard C. Hoagland has been very important to you in some of the work you've done, and so I'm bringing him online for a little bit to chat with you and us as our advisor here.
Interesting.
Some of the we'll do a mini roundtable discussion for a little bit right now. Hey, Richard, how are you?
Hey, good evening, George.
Good. You know, Richard, I wanted you to be part of this primarily because I've always heard that you've been very important for John and some of his work and research. And years ago, when you started talking about some structures that you believed were not on just Mars, but on the moon, that I think, John, and I'll let you speak for yourself on this, how influential has Mr. Hoagland been for you?
Well, very influential. When I saw the Moon-Mars connection, I was flabbergasted. This was the most interesting thing I ever saw in my life, and that's what made me start looking for this stuff. And I happened, just by accident, to get two photos out of NASA that were unretouched. One was the north face of the crater Copernicus, and the other was a photo taken by Lick Observatory in 1947. And I want to make it clear that I do not believe that Richard believes any of this stuff about souls. That's my idea, not his. What I'm saying is Richard found the that thing in the sinus medi and found the picture of it, which.
Well, I have a little surprise for you, John, tonight. I just earlier this evening got off the phone with my assistant, Carrie Clark, who is a photo expert in New York, and she did some of the early work on the original Apollo data that we procured out of Houston, out of the LPL, out of the Goddard National Space Science Data Center, and she has found a print for you of this several-mile-high glass tower, this ruin that I found on 84M, which is one of the lunar orbiter shots taken back in, I think, 1966. So you will be getting that.
Fantastic. You're making good on your promise that you made 4 months ago, right?
Well, she's been looking. She's been on the road, and we have this incredible archive, and we kind of distributed it around the country. You know, Steve Troy has parts of it. I have parts of it. Other people have parts of it. Carrie has parts of it. And we had to go finding, because these are all analog prints. There's nothing computerized, nothing digitized. These are the original analog images that came down from both the unmanned lunar orbiters in the 60s and as well as the Apollo Hasselblad, another film from later in the 60s and the early 70s. So you will be getting that. Now, George, I have something to announce.
Okay, go ahead.
This fall in Southern California, just about 2 hours east of Los Angeles, I'm going to be doing the first of an experimental series of retreats where we're going to have like 4 days to get people together and really go through where we are on the eve of some major breakthroughs that I think are coming. And I'm going to be revealing and publicizing and unveiling some absolutely mind-blowing lunar imagery that unquestionably answers the question that one of your callers in the first hour had, did we go to the moon? Yes, ma'am, we went, and we got the photographic proof. And, John, it is going to blow your socks off when you see what it is we found.
I can hardly wait.
And it is in color. It is corroborated. It is in the official database. It's available for anybody to go check. And it raises so many profound implications as to who has known what and when. And I appreciate that you kind of separate me from your theories as to what all this stuff means. But in terms of the evidence, gentlemen, there is no question that NASA has been hiding not only the stuff on Mars, but an extraordinary ancient set of ruins right next door on the moon. And I fully concur with John that there are two space programs. There is a secret program. There's the official program, which is the cover. And when you say, well, why would you spend $16 billion a year on a cover? Well, it's not their money. It's our money. They don't care how much they spend as long as they keep us in the dark.
Well, why don't we see those rocket ships going up for the secret program?
Because they're not rockets. George, come on.
What are they then?
They're electrogravitic anti-gravity spacecraft that, you know, Tim Ventura and I have been discussing, which the Russians are discussing in the open literature, which are visible on the STS-80 and 48 videos that I have provided to Art, and I guess you've probably seen them too.
Yes, I've seen them.
Whitley, you know, used one of them, I think, on his NBC program some years ago. There's a concurrence between the two programs, but, I mean, my own intel sources, of which I have a few and they're very reliable, have unquestionably verified that there are two programs. Now, this Britisher, this Gary McKinnon, who was...
he's the computer hacker.
Yeah, who broke into NASA computers. He found, years ago, pilot lists, officers' lists, the squadron names, the names of their ships, all this stuff, and that's why we're throwing the book at him, and we're going to give him 70 years